She was my married neighbor, graceful, distant, and living behind a perfect fence that hid too much silence. The night she said, "This stays between us," I thought she meant a secret. But what she really meant, was a feeling we'd never speak of again. Mornings on Cedar Lane had a rhythm of their own. The kind that didn't need alarm clocks or city noise to announce the day, just the soft hiss of sprinklers, the faint rustle of leaves, and the smell of someone's toast drifting through open windows. I'd lived there for barely a year, still half a stranger among people who'd spent decades trading small talk and borrowed tools. But there was one person who caught my attention almost immediately, her. She lived 2 houses down. Early 40s, maybe. Always dressed with that quiet grace that doesn't try to impress anyone. Some mornings she wore light sweaters and tied her hair loosely, as if the wind itself had done it for her. I'd see her watering the small garden in front of her porch, not in a rush, not distracted, just moving with this calm, deliberate ease. There was something grounding about her, something that didn't fit the rest of the world's pace. The first time she spoke to me, it was something ordinary. A simple, "Morning, over the hedge." Her voice, low, steady, almost soothing, had the kind of warmth you don't forget after hearing once. I replied, awkwardly polite, but the way her lips curved into a soft, amused smile told me she noticed. After that, we kept exchanging those little greetings. The kind neighbors share without meaning much, except I started to look forward to them. Some days, she'd mention the weather, or the roses that refused to bloom. Sometimes I'd catch her glancing up when I came home, her hand pausing mid-motion as she locked her car. It wasn't flirtation, not yet. Just an unspoken recognition. There's a moment, quiet but vivid, when curiosity becomes awareness. One morning, she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and sunlight caught the thin gold band on her hand. I realized then she was married. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Something about it drew a line in the air between us. Still, I found myself noticing the smallest things, the sound of her laugh drifting through her open window, the smell of her coffee when I passed by her porch. I told myself I wasn't watching her, I was just noticing what was there. But deep down, I knew better. Because sometimes, all it takes is one gentle voice in the morning air to make an ordinary street feel like the beginning of something you shouldn't want, but can't help waiting for. It happened after one of those restless summer storms, the kind that sweeps through overnight, rattles the windows, and leaves the air smelling like wet earth and apology. When I stepped into the backyard that morning, I saw the damage. A section of the fence had given up, leaning halfway into her yard like it was reaching for help. I was crouched down, inspecting the split wood, when I heard her voice behind me. "Looks like the storm picked a fight with both of us." She was standing there in a soft gray cardigan, hair still damp from the misty air. I smiled, trying to sound casual. "Yeah. Guess I'll have to fix it before it decides to fall completely." She walked closer, arms folded, studying the damage. "My husband's out of town until next week," she said quietly. "If you want, I can help you measure the boards later. I still have some tools in the shed." The way she said it, light, but deliberate, made it hard to tell if she was just being polite or if she wanted the company. Either way, I didn't say no. Later that afternoon, I found myself at her door, toolbox in hand. She smiled when she saw me, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. Inside, her home felt exactly like her, warm, precise, yet touched with quiet solitude. The scent of brewed tea lingered in the air, blending with the faint sweetness of something floral, maybe lavender. Framed photos lined the hallway, trips, celebrations, the sort of moments people capture to prove their lives are full. And yet, something in those frozen smiles felt distant. We worked side by side for a while, measuring, marking, comparing notes on which nails to use. Conversation came easily. She asked about my work, I asked about her garden. At some point, she laughed softly and said, "You're easier to talk to than most people I've known for years." The words hung there, tender and slightly dangerous. When we finished, she poured tea for both of us. Her fingers brushed mine as she passed the cup, a small, accidental touch, but it felt heavier than it should have. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something more, but instead, she just smiled. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For helping, and for listening." And in that stillness, with the rain drying on the windows and her voice barely above a whisper, I realized it wasn't the fence that had opened. It was something else entirely. The days that followed carried a quiet pull, like gravity had shifted just slightly in her direction. What began as polite waves across the fence turned into longer talks, small things at first. She'd ask about the noise from my apartment renovation, or I'd compliment the wildflowers blooming along her walkway. But those casual exchanges began stretching into minutes, then hours. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Sometimes I'd find her on the porch after work, a cup of tea in her hands, the faintest smile playing on her lips. She'd see me walking by and tilt her head toward the empty chair beside her. No words, just that simple gesture. And I'd always take it. Those evenings felt suspended in time. We'd talk about music, books, the places we hadn't been brave enough to visit yet. She had this way of listening, really listening, where you could almost hear her heart softening behind her silence. And sometimes, when she'd share something about her life, her routines, her disappointments, I'd feel the weight of her honesty settle in the air between us. One evening, as the sky dimmed into that tender shade between blue and gold, she laughed at something I said, really laughed, the kind that makes her eyes crease at the corners. And then, still smiling, she murmured, "You make things feel lighter." I don't think she meant it as a confession. It sounded more like relief, as if she hadn't felt light in a long time. But the way she looked at me afterward, that soft hesitation in her gaze, made my pulse stumble. She reached for her cup, her fingers brushing mine again. Not intentional, but not accidental either. The touch was brief, but it lingered, the way warmth does after the sun sets. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The porch light flickered on, catching the soft sheen of her hair, the quiet steadiness in her expression. It wasn't desire that filled that silence, not yet, it was recognition. A quiet understanding that something between us had changed. When I finally stood to leave, she didn't ask me to stay, and I didn't want to make her choose between what she felt and what she should. But as I walked home, her words echoed in my head, "You make things feel lighter," and I realized how heavy everything had felt before her. The storm came without warning, one of those heavy, urgent rains that turn the sky a dull silver and make the air hum with restlessness. By evening, thunder rolled across Cedar Lane, and the power flickered once before going dark. I was half reading, half listening to the rain when the knock came. 3 soft taps, hesitant, uneven. When I opened the door, she stood there, soaked through, rain dripping from her hair onto her sweater. Her eyes searched mine with a quiet panic that wasn't about the weather. I didn't know where else to go," she said, breathless, clutching her coat tight around her. I stepped aside without a word. She entered like someone afraid of being seen. The scent of rain and her perfume, faint jasmine, dulled by water, filled the room. I handed her a towel, and she laughed softly, embarrassed. I must look ridiculous. She didn't. She looked real, stripped of all the composure she usually wore like armor. I made tea while she sat on the couch, the towel draped over her shoulders. The quiet between us wasn't awkward, it was fragile. The kind you don't dare disturb. After a while, she sighed, the sound of something long held finally breaking. "We argued," she said. "Over something small. I don't even know why I let it get to me anymore." Her eyes glistened in the low light. She looked down at her hands, twisting the edge of the towel. "I just needed someone who'd listen. Without judging. Without trying to fix me." I sat beside her, close but not too close. "I can do that," I said quietly. She smiled, tired, but grateful. The kind of smile that tells you she's been holding herself together for too long. The rain softened outside, turning to a whisper against the windows. She turned to me then, her eyes steady, voice trembling slightly. Sometimes, she whispered, I wonder if this, us talking, laughing, means more to me than it should. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The air between us felt alive, charged but tender. Then she reached for my hand, just lightly, and the warmth of her touch said everything her words couldn't. For a heartbeat, we just sat there, her pulse a soft rhythm beneath my palm. When she finally let go, the silence that followed felt sacred. Neither of us moved. Neither of us needed to. Because some confessions don't need to be spoken aloud, they just need to be felt. After that night, something unspoken settled between us, not awkwardness, exactly, but an awareness neither of us could ignore. Our talks grew shorter, our silences longer. When she smiled now, it came with hesitation, as if she was afraid of what it might reveal. Days passed before we spoke again properly. It was late afternoon when I saw her outside, tending to her roses. The light was soft, the kind that turns everything gold before fading. I almost walked past, almost, but she looked up, caught my eyes, and said quietly, you could help me, if you're not busy. So I did. We worked side by side again, barely speaking. The air was warm, filled with the scent of rain-soaked soil and the faint sweetness of her perfume. At one point, she brushed a petal off my sleeve, such a small gesture, but it lingered like something meant. When we finished, she poured us each a glass of iced tea, and we sat on her porch steps, watching the sun melt behind the trees. The quiet stretched between us until she finally broke it. You know, she said softly, staring at the glass in her hands, people would misunderstand this. I turned to her. This? She gave a faint, sad smile. Whatever this is between us. Her voice wavered, calm, but threaded with something fragile. I don't even know what to call it. But I know it can't go anywhere. The words stung, not because they were unexpected, but because they were true. She set her glass down and looked at me, really looked. Her eyes were deep, tired, and searching. This stays between us, she said finally. All right? For a second, all I could do was breathe her in, the faint warmth of her skin, the soft scent of rose petals clinging to her sleeve, the quiet ache in her tone. Then I nodded. Where else could it go? Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say more, but no words came. Instead, she reached out, her fingertips grazing my wrist, her touch trembling yet sure. That small contact, that quiet, fragile moment, felt like a promise wrapped inside a goodbye. When she pulled her hand back, the air around us seemed to exhale. The day slipped into evening, and neither of us moved to break the spell. Because deep down, we both knew what she really meant wasn't secrecy. It was protection, for something too pure, too fleeting, to survive anywhere else but between us. After that afternoon on her porch, everything changed, not dramatically, but in quiet, invisible ways. Our talks became fewer, our smiles more restrained. She still waved when she saw me, but the warmth that used to fill those moments had softened into something careful, almost rehearsed. I told myself it was for the best. She had drawn a line, and I had agreed to it. But the heart doesn't always listen to what's reasonable. It listens to echoes, to small absences that make too much noise. Weeks passed. The world went on. The fence was fixed, the flowers bloomed, and yet, everything felt slightly off balance, like a song missing its last note. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of her through her kitchen window, standing still, lost in thought. Other times, she'd be walking her dog just as I was coming home, and we'd exchange polite smiles that said nothing but remembered everything. The hardest part wasn't losing the conversations, it was losing the ease. That unspoken comfort we once shared had turned into a silence that neither of us knew how to break. One evening, I saw her husband return. His car pulled into the driveway just as the sun began to sink. She came out to greet him, and I stood at my window, pretending not to look. She smiled, the kind of smile that photographs well but doesn't reach the eyes. And I realized, painfully, that I'd come to know the difference. Later that night, I found her mug in my kitchen cabinet, the one she'd used that rainy evening. I hadn't noticed I'd kept it. It still smelled faintly of her tea, of something floral and warm. I traced the rim with my thumb, feeling foolish for how much a simple cup could mean. The next morning, I placed it back on the shelf, a small act of letting go. Or trying to. Every now and then, I'd hear her laughter drifting faintly from her backyard when friends visited, and though I told myself to move on, a part of me still leaned toward that sound, like a compass finding north. She had asked for distance, and I gave it. But what neither of us said, what we couldn't, was that distance doesn't erase connection. It just turns it into something quieter. Something that lives in the spaces between moments, and hurts gently, every time you remember why. Autumn came softly that year, the kind that paints everything in amber and gold before the wind carries it all away. The air grew cooler, the days shorter. Cedar Lane looked the same, yet somehow emptier. I hadn't spoken to her properly in months. We'd become neighbors again, nothing more, at least on the surface. Then one afternoon, I saw the moving truck. She was on her porch, wrapping a vase in paper, her movements slow, deliberate. Her husband directed the movers, talking loudly into his phone. I stood there at my gate, not sure whether to wave, to call out, or to simply let her go in silence. But she saw me. Of course she did. She always noticed before I did. She hesitated, then walked over, no smile this time, just that calm, steady grace I'd first admired. When she reached the fence, she rested her hands on the top rail, fingers brushing the rough wood between us. "We're moving," she said quietly. "He got transferred. New city, new start." I nodded, my throat tightening. "You'll like it there," I managed to say. "Different skies, maybe kinder weather." She looked down, then back at me, her eyes soft but glimmering with something I couldn't name. "Maybe," she whispered. "But it won't feel like this place." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind picked up a loose strand of her hair, brushing it across her face. Without thinking, I reached over the fence and tucked it gently behind her ear. My fingers lingered for half a heartbeat, not in longing, but in gratitude. She didn't move away. Instead, she placed her hand over mine, a light touch, almost weightless. "Thank you," she said. "For seeing me when I felt invisible." I wanted to tell her that she'd done the same for me, that her presence had softened something I didn't even know had hardened. But words felt too small for that kind of truth. So I just nodded. When she turned to leave, she didn't look back. But halfway to the door, she paused and said, without facing me, "Take care of the fence." "I will," I replied softly. And that was it. Her car pulled away as the sun dipped low, painting the street in a fading gold. The air smelled faintly of jasmine again, as if the wind had decided to leave me one last reminder. I stood there until the sound of the engine disappeared, and in that silence, I realized something simple and beautiful: not every connection is meant to last. Some are meant to change you, quietly, deeply, and then let you go. If this story touched something quiet inside you, that space where longing and tenderness live, take a moment before you go. Leave a comment below and tell me what line stayed with you the most. I read every one. And if you'd like more stories like this, quiet, emotional, and real, subscribe, so you don't miss the next one. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones that whisper instead of shout.